Yeah, and I think it's as good a time as ever now to maybe move on to that U20 World Cup success in 2023. The tournament was hosted in Argentina, so very, very interesting venue also for Uruguay to achieve such a success. And they did it through, I would say, a very conservative style of play. So they beat Italy in the final after keeping a clean sheet in 6 of their 7 matches. 4 of their victories came via 1-0 scoreline. And when we looked at this success, David, I mean, was it even imaginable going into the tournament? Was this something on people's radar in Uruguay that this was really such a special generation? Or did this really develop as the tournament went on?
I think this ties a little bit back into what we were talking about earlier in terms of the culture. Because Uruguay, every tournament they start, they have the belief to win it. That's how it is. So this was no different. But to be realistic, Uruguay played a good qualifying tournament, the Sudamericano. It's basically the qualifying tournament for the World Cup, for the Under 20 World Cup. But Brazil was just too good for the rest of the field in that tournament. Brazil also beat Uruguay in direct confrontation. So we'll always be hard. But Israel actually beat Brazil. I think it was the quarterfinal. So that opened up the road a little bit. And to Uruguay's performances in the tournament, it was tournament football, basically. They weren't displaying amazing football. They were keeping or staying in games and getting the result with good goals. And Anderson Duarte, who I mentioned earlier, was the big man in the knockout stages. But it was a really exciting tournament. I mean, especially because it was in Argentina, and many Uruguayan fans were able to go to the games to then win it in the final against Italy with Luciano Rodriguez, who had a disappointing tournament, I would say, to then actually score the winning goal and show that, yeah, I'm Uruguay's golden boy. I'm the next Suarez, which I believe if there's anyone that's going to come close to Suarez of the upcoming generation, it's Luciano Rodriguez. But yeah, it was really exciting, and I'm interested to know, Jacek, Adam, how did you experience the tournament?
Before the tournament, I wasn't seeing Uruguay as one of the main favorites. I think on paper they looked good, but not that good. They actually showed what Uruguayan football is all about. So extreme solidity, consistency. And when you look at this squad today, these players are not considered as top world class talents. So it was a group of really solid players. Plus, as you mentioned, Anderson Duarte doing amazing things. Luciano Rodriguez did his thing in the final. But still, before the tournaments, I wouldn't put my money on Uruguay, to be honest.
Yeah, I would even say it felt like the Euro 2024 Gareth Southgate England with a happier ending then, because they really played the same type of conservative style. And I think Uruguay were also a little bit more vindicated to do so because they didn't necessarily have these absolute standout stars. I mean, you look at England, for example, they had real individual quality where you'd say you don't need to play such a defensive system. Versus in Uruguay, okay, we obviously had some key attacking personnel who we'll get to, but it was more so that they really did this as a unit, as a collective team. And that's quite rare in youth football, I would say. I mean, you looked at Brazil, for example, it was a collection of individuals from the very beginning, and that was ultimately their downfall. Versus Uruguay, were always more than the sum of their parts. And it just goes back to what we mentioned a bit at the beginning of the show. This real pride in the national team. And I would say even the ability to, even in youth national teams where every player's goal is to make a name for themselves and earn that move to Europe, you still didn't feel like people were putting their own ego ahead of the team. And that's ultimately why they were able to succeed where so many other nations with so much more talent, like England, like Brazil, failed in this competition.
Yeah, I certainly agree with the latter part, but I would push back a little bit on the earlier because Uruguay was based on or tried to be based on a solid backbone, a solid defense. And Bozelli and Gonzalez, they were the best center defensive partnership in the tournament, hands down. Maturo great on the left. The right was more interchangeable in terms of who played there and less of a big star. But when you look further up the pitch, yeah, Uruguay played with a defensive midfielder with Damian Garcia, or Ignacio Sosa. But next to that was Fabricio Diaz, who was really a really good footballer and who was more focused on progressing the play. And then you had Abaldo, Franco Gonzalez, Luciano Rodriguez, Andres Ferrari, who unfortunately got injured in the first game. But these are all really attacking players. So it was a combination between being solid, but also having enough attacking talent to score goals to make defenders pay. So it was the mix of that, and I think that's the generation that's coming up now. It's a better mix. It's less conservative, as we have seen from Uruguay, for example, in the 2010 World Cup or 2014 World Cup. It's more of a balance, a mix, high intensity, hard working, but also an incredible amount of talent. And that's what is exciting about the national team, the senior national team, which is obviously developing, growing, trying to have a different shape, different identity under Bielsa. We can go on, maybe talk about that. But yeah, that's the exciting thing, I guess, for the future.
And David, would you compare this under 20 team to the team that made the semifinal of the World Cup in 2010? Are there any similarities? I think so. Like extremely solid center back duo, and midfield with hard working players who love to play on high intensity, and then some individual brilliance of the strikers of attacking players. I think there are some similarities between these two teams.
Absolutely, and I honestly get the point which Adam made as well, and I do partly agree with it. And also, this was a team that were able to live in a tournament, to live through hard moments in a game, in games where they were perhaps tested a little bit, and they came out the other side. And that's what I always like about teams. You know, I obviously love teams that can play great football, and that can really blitz their opponents. But what I actually do like a lot more is to see teams suffer, maybe be on the brink of defeat and get out of the other side. That's where you show the character. And when you are young guys who don't play with each other every week, like the under 20 said were, and show that, it's a great testament to their character, and hopefully they can go on to have great careers. Many of them actually, yeah.
Really love that you said like they are able to suffer and still win games. And I think the most Uruguayan club in Europe is Atletico Madrid, and actually they call Atletico sufridores, so the one that suffer. So that's why Cholo Simeone and Atletico in general, they love Uruguayan players so much.
Yeah, if anybody's playing football talent show bingo, you've had your mention of Atletico Madrid and Cholo Simeone. He's come up on every episode, whether we're talking about Georgia, Uruguay, Morocco, or player roles. Cholo Simeone always somehow comes up. So there he is once again.
This time it's not a bias. Like you can't mention Uruguayan football without mentioning Atletico Madrid, and I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. Yeah, when I looked at Uruguay's campaign, it was really a slow ascent to ultimately then be crowned champions. I mean, obviously, of course, they beat Iraq 4-0 in the opening game, but pretty much everybody could have beat this Iraq side. They were not necessarily the stars of the U20 World Cup. And then they were beaten 3-2 by England, a scoreline which maybe could have even been larger. I mean, England were really by far the superior side in that match. And then in a do or die match against Tunisia, they needed a 90th minute winner to ultimately go through. So it was not really a group stage that by any means looked like a side that would be crowned champions. And then when we get to the knockout stages, that's when we start to slowly see Uruguay come into their trot. You saw a victory over Gambia, 1-0, then a 2-0 versus USA, which I would even maybe argue was their best performance of the entire tournament. A very, very dominant display. Then, of course, we mentioned that 1-0 victory against Israel to go to the final. And then against Italy, who were by far, I would say, the favorites in that final, Uruguay were the better side. I mean, they really nullified an Italian side that had been very, very dominant throughout this tournament. So you really saw how they steadily grew into the side that ultimately won this title by deservedly.
Yeah, no, it was a journey, that tournament. It really was. And good tournaments actually have to be journeys. I mean, it's great to win a tournament like easily, blitz the all the opponents, but the best tournaments actually are journeys. Argentina was a good example. Lose the first game, grow into it, have the kind of anxiety of not making it to the group stages because they were still struggling against Poland and Mexico to a certain extent. But if you grow into the tournament, get better and win it, it's fantastic. And Uruguay were like that tournament.